Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this September 28th, 2015 day on our calendar. I'm your host, Greg Anthony. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com, and you can listen to my show every evening from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. This is the first place to catch it because it gets carried on a lot of other places afterwards, but if you want to listen to the first broadcast, every day at 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Go there. It's one of the last channels that I've seen that's covering anything regarding the Pope. And I don't mean from the point of view of lauding him as a man of peace, the people's Pope, all that kind of stuff you hear all over the place. For the last 5 days, it's rather annoying when you understand the truth about that organization. But anyway, I wanted to spend some time giving you my thoughts about this papal visit that ended yesterday while hundreds of thousands of people were adoring this man. And I frankly had a hard time watching some of it. I wanted to do it so I could listen to the hypocrisy, but I found myself switching back to the baseball game. Now, the real sad thing is the hypocrisies that are coming out of his mouth are believed by millions. I've told you a long time ago, and there are a few people in this world who tell you the same thing, that the Pope is not the vicar of Christ. And what does that mean? He's masquerading as Christ on earth, basically. It's kind of like a Halloween costume he wears. But he wears it every day of the year. And if the truth be known, folks, let's look at when this idea that Christ is on earth through the Pope came to be. Well, you probably think it was always that way. Well, it wasn't. It wasn't until the mid-1800s that we had a maniacal Pope decide that he was Christ. Yes. And he pushed it through, even though many, many cardinals at the time, many people in the church didn't want this doctrine. And guess how he got it? He used the Jesuits as his henchmen. And from that day forward, up until today, they call themselves Christ on earth. And what they say when they talk, there's a term they use. And it's not used very often, but when they speak in those words, they actually say that's Christ talking. Okay. A good masquerade they've put on you. Now, I could spend shows, and I have in the past, if you go back to some of my old shows regarding an in-depth look at how the Pope became called the Vicar of Christ. And it was astonishing to me because I grew up as a Catholic. And when I was a kid, I thought that was always the way it was since the time of Jesus. He kind of like walked up to Peter and said, "You're Christ on earth now." That's what I thought. They do not teach you the Bible when you're a Catholic going to their schools. And they don't do it for a reason, because they want to indoctrinate you with what is called Catholicism, which to me is nothing more than a pagan religion. Okay, so we'll leave that because we could go on and on forever. And I wanted to bring some of my thoughts to you regarding the Pope's visit. And, I thought about this and I said, maybe I should wait a few days and reflect on this and think so I can present a real, it's not, sometimes it's not good to talk when there's too much emotion involved. And that's what I feel today, a lot of emotion about this visit here. It brings up so many things in my mind because for years I've been covering this organization and trying to show to people that they are not what they say they are. And in turn, the American government is not what it says it is. And in turn, this has been the way it was from the beginning of the formation of our country. The idea that we're a free country has always been the cover for what is going to happen in the future, their long-range plan, and that was to bring about a one-world government, one-world order, with the Antichrist at the head, which we see this week is really what they're doing here in America. I was amazed at some of the places he went, some of the things that were going on. But it didn't surprise me one bit, because I knew there would be millions of people. No matter how much you speak in terms of the truth, what's been covered up, what you should understand, why no one. That Pope should have got off that plane, and he should have been escorted immediately to another plane and told to go back to Rome. But the reason is, this organization, along with your founding fathers, basically put a stamp on the Capitol building that said, this is owned by the Vatican. And if you don't believe me, you just have to look at the signs and symbols they use. Don't listen to the words they speak, because words are cheap. And most times, there's three words. He says he's the Vicar of Christ. That is a lie. He worships the Son. He's a Satan worshiper. 2, he says that he represents God, that God is, he does not represent God. He represents the opposite. This is what they do to you. And so the same thing goes with your leaders of your free country. They don't really care about you. They are your owners. They've owned you ever since, and no, technically they've owned you ever since the 14th Amendment came into play, where you were made into nothing more than a piece of property and a bill of lading with all capital letter names, which isn't your name. For example, they gave me the bill of lading of Gregory Anthony Szymanski in capital letters. For purposes of radio, I don't use my last name anymore, because I'm using Greg Anthony, which is my God-given name and my sovereign name. Now, I have not approached the powers that be in the court system to officially be recognized as that, which if I did with a legal brief, I would get that. But then you have to go through every step to break each chain that you have to this 14th Amendment slavery government. They make it seem like, words are cheap. They can say free. Obama, Clinton, all of them can say, the Pope, that this is a God-fearing country. They do not worship God. That's the message I want to bring to you today. And I told you I should have waited a few days and thought this out a little bit more, but I might as well get it off my chest while I'm talking to you today. So, think about all the millions of people that were out there. Think about all of the nonsense you heard from your leaders praising this man. Think about what they have planned for you in the future. Think about some of the little things behind the scenes. They were calling it the Global Day of Unity to end world poverty, to end injustice, and to end, what was the other one? Whatever, we can start there. What is poverty? And how do you end it? I should mention they wanted to redistribute wealth. Let's start with poverty. If the Vatican and our government redistributed their wealth, we wouldn't be poor, and neither would the countries around the country, the third world country, so to speak. They wouldn't. And every time the Vatican goes in and gets its dirty little hands into a country, it turns out that the country is impoverished, because the gold goes into the pockets of the whether it be fascist or no matter what is a dictator or is it a republic or whatever, they will work to take the land from you, put it in their pocket, and then call for the people who seem not to, from the middle class, for example, in our country, you are too wealthy in their eyes. Yeah. But the Vatican can go around with billions. You know how much? It is so hypocritical. No one ever questions and says, hey, if you want to redistribute wealth, why don't you start in your own house? But that'll never happen. Then we're talking about poverty, ending poverty. That it's not going to end. It's only going to be, the wealth will be redistributed into their pockets. Now, in our country, we have a ever-growing percentage of rich people that control most everything. Then we have a middle class that's teetering on being impoverished, or one paycheck away from being on the street. And then we have the poor, and the poor are there to keep the middle class working because they don't want to. They look at these people and they get frightened. If I don't go to work today, I am going to be just like them. But what are the opportunities really out there? You've seen how corporate America's taken over. It's pretty obvious to me what they're doing. Now, all of that stuff comes into play, and just ask yourself this question: what does this man have to do about this political stuff anyway? Why don't you stick to your pagan worshiping and tell us what you're really doing? That's all I'd ask. I don't really care what they do as far as their worshiping. When it gets into killing people, that I would have a disagreement with. But they've killed so many people over the centuries that what they're doing today seems like small potatoes, but it's not going to be that way for long. So I said, hey, if you want to be a pagan, just tell us the truth. But that's never going to happen. And so we're looking at this Pope. Finally, he's leaving. He left yesterday. And, we had some real big things happen. John Boehner, the Republican House leader, all this, garbage in politics I never follow because it's all a game. It's all a charade. It's a great act. It's a great show. But he decides he's going to resign the House. He's the Speaker of the House for the Republican Party, if that makes any difference. And he's going to resign because he had a meeting with the Pope. And he doesn't want to cause gridlock. Who knows? Maybe he wants to work as maybe he's going to go to work in the Vatican. Who knows? He's got a better deal maybe with him. So anyway, we have this going on. We have things in government working together with the spiritual Antichrist, the Pope. And what's going to happen from that is not going to be good. So I thought, I could reflect for hours and days and days and days, go through every little thing he did, but I'm not going to. And I've got a lot of people emailing me doing that. But let's do something substantial here for the remainder of this show. And I was thinking about this, and I said to myself, all of this nonsense is here only because our media and our government has sold out to these people. Now, was it always that way? Well, yes. In the beginning, there was a small group of people that did, and that happened to be the Founding Fathers and a few others. But in a sense, most of the people during that time were anti-Vatican. They knew what the Vatican had done overseas, why they were kicked out of, the Jesuits kicked out of all these countries, not for their political or their religious views, but because they wanted to overthrow governments, just like they're doing here. So it was a process that took place over, and we're going to start with what happened with Lincoln. And I'm going to ask you the question now. This man in a white dress, masquerading, with his Halloween costume. It was good. He should have came out on October 31st. But then who knows what they do on those pagan days. But he came with his little costume, telling us, everything. We're looking, we're on your side. Well, he's not. Now, and he walked by probably the Lincoln Memorial, and he walked by that obelisk, which represents Isis and pagan goddesses, not freedom, and was gloating. We've really buffaloed these people. They've been good at this for hundreds of years, and they're getting better at their deception. In the old days, they had to get the rack out. They had to do all those nasty things, poke people's eyes out if they didn't believe them. It was very, very brutal. They've gotten their killing machine down to a better, it's a slow killing machine. They don't actually use the Inquisition rack and all those darn things they did to. When you look at some of the things in museums still that show you what this organization is about, how can a free country ever allow them here? But we do, because we're not a free country. We're owned by them. Those are your owners, and they lie to you. Now, here's the point. He's walking around masquerading himself And guess what? You know, it made me think about Lincoln. Because they put a big memorial up for him. And I started thinking back then, there were a lot more people, even some people in our government, who knew what this organization was about, and this would have never happened. He would have never been able to come here on a ship and get off on our shores. He'd have been escorted as soon as he went into American waters right out of our country. And why? Because they understood what happened. And this investigation concerning whether, Lincoln was killed by the devious and cunning hand of the Jesuit in the Vatican, with their assistance, has been well hidden from the American people. Because if we understood this, the history books have been changed, folks. They can't come here and lie like they do, as good as they do, right? No, they can't. And the reason they can't is because people would start understanding who they really are. Just a second. My dog, Max, had to come inside. He always bugs me halfway through this show. So I'm leaving the door open. Now, let's look at this. Although numerous books, long since taken off the library shelves, to protect these guilty parties, including some of those in our government, the Vatican, some foreign leaders who wanted to turn this country inside out with a civil war. Excuse me. But let's consider this. This Vatican connection to the Lincoln assassination still remains a mystery to millions, otherwise they wouldn't be out there. And something most important, most Americans consider what I just said preposterous. That's what makes this so sad, because it's not preposterous. It's the truth. But if the truth be told, and Americans were allowed to read the facts hidden in these books, perhaps we wouldn't have Jesuits in this country. We wouldn't have Georgetown University right next to the Vatican controlling all of our diplomatic relations. In fact, if the real history of the Jesuits in the Vatican ever were truthfully told, it would also be easy to see why America in the 1860s, yes, your country, still at that point had a number of people who understood who these people are, why they cut off diplomatic relations with the Vatican in the 1860s, because of their unquestioned, there's no doubt about it, they put together the hit team that killed Lincoln. Not to be, and this remained, these official diplomatic relations remained until Reagan took over in office and reinstituted relations with John Paul II. However, besides most Americans not even realizing this, never told these stories, as if that's not important, it's important to believe he's the vicar of Christ, right? That's incredible. However, besides not even realizing the above, which I just mentioned, has anyone really bothered to ask why diplomatic relations with the Vatican were originally cut off? What was that No one cares. Could it have been something to do with many American leaders who actually understood the Jesuit and Vatican connection to the Lincoln assassination and what they were trying to do to this country even back then? Yes. But that doesn't matter anymore, does it? And the flood of illegal immigrants. Look, this country is always brought in its poor. And the reason, when you look back at what did they do to the Irish people back when they first came over, the Polish people, the Italian people, they were raping that country, so they let their, the immigrants come here, and they're doing the same thing now in Mexico, South America, the Middle East, all over the place. Look what's going on with immigration in Europe. Flooding Europe. For a reason. How many people, what I find quite interesting, and no one ever talks about this, and I'll get back to the Lincoln assassination in a minute. But all these illegal immigrants from Mexico coming into our country. Look, these are good people. And I'm not saying, they don't, if I was a Mexican coming, living the way they are knowing, but they don't know they've been raped over by the Vatican and their dictators and the drug cartels and all the things sponsored by the Vatican. So they're pushed out of their country, and the reason they're pushed out, because Mexico has a lot of wealth there. That could be a very prosperous country. But they can't have it that way. So we're getting flooded with millions of these poor, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the thing is, most of them have not been told the truth. They're ignorant of what really happened to their country, and they come here looking for a little better job. Maybe $10 an hour is a lot. But guess what? Most of them are Catholic. Most of them go to church on Sunday. Most of them, if they don't, still have this tie to Catholicism. And man, that's a good thing for the New World Order in our country. Now, I don't mind millions of these immigrants coming in, but I'd like to have them talk to me to teach them a little bit about what's really going on here so we don't get buffaloed, because they're going to bring in millions of these people beholden to this vicar of Christ who's actually the Antichrist. And they're going to say that they have a little better life. But in the end, it's not going to be. So that, that's very seldom talked about. So has anybody really asked why Reagan reinstituted diplomatic ties with the Vatican? Did anybody even put up a argument back then? Well, most people didn't, but there were some organizations. There were some lawsuits filed. I think there was a group of Christians and Protestants, and then a group of Jewish contingent that filed lawsuits between separation of church and state, stating that you cannot do this. You cannot allow this religion to have these favors when we don't. You know what? How much money the Vatican gets off taxes in Germany and all these other countries, and what they bilk us for? And that is basically planned by your government. So they give this Catholic religion special treatment, and there were lawsuits, but guess what? They all lost, because the judges were in the pocket of the same people that I'm talking about. And I told you the most endangered species in the world today is a honest judge. So we don't have any freedoms of religion. You see it back then. They said no. Now, we'll get into deeper of why they came here. And you'll see through some stories I've presented to you how people today, even if they talk about the Vatican as the Antichrist and want this man out of our country, and I think it's a good thing. We do have something on the books called separation of church and state, but it doesn't exist in reality anymore. You saw that over the weekend. And in the second half hour, I'm going to refer to a book written back around the time of the Lincoln assassination and the years after that understood who these people are, written by a high-level major general in our country. And it really tells you how really deceived we've become over the years, since the 1850s. We're better off then. Back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com worldwide. Freedom is never free. We need your support today at FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening. Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased. It has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.
Okay, we're back for the second half hour of the Investigative Journal, and let me pick up right where I left off. How come people really don't realize why we broke off diplomatic relations with the Vatican and then reinstituted them with Reagan? Could it have something to do with many American leaders back at the time who actually understood the Jesuit connection to the Lincoln assassination? You see, as we've progressed as a country, we've digressed, in a sense. We have built up a huge federal government that's working together with this papal power to basically bring us under a one-world government, a one-world religion. Now, in an effort to uncover this veil of secrecy, let me read you a passage taken from a book well hidden by the Jesuits and written by Major General Thomas Harris in the late 1800s, entitled Rome's Responsibility for the Assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Now, I can remember in history class when I was in college discussing the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, but I never saw any of these books. I never saw any of the books that really wanted to get to the bottom of what was happening. I mean, you should be able to search every side of the story, right? And that's why I said a long time ago, I want all my money back from those schools that I went to and paid for these bogus history classes. Now, listen to Harris's opening passage, dedicated to the memory of Lincoln, and questions that should be asked today before we allowed this man with a white dress masquerading as the Pope. But are strangely, we're not given this. They're strangely kept out of the stream of discussion, indicating how deep and the devious power of these people, the Jesuits and the Vatican, has infected the free institutions of this country. He said this, and this is one reason why back then they couldn't do what they're doing today, because they needed more time. The anti-Catholic agitation, said Harris, that is so rife in the United States today marks a crisis in our history. Hundreds of intelligent, patriotic, conscientious men are earnestly, laboriously, and courageously devoting themselves to this anti-Catholic agitation for a reason. Newspapers have sprung up all over the country to give warning of danger and to arouse the spirit of American patriotism against this organization. Now, what's the difference today? You don't have any newspapers rising up. You have all newspapers working for them. You have all of your politicians earnestly, laboriously, and courageously protecting the Vatican and working with them to bring your country down. That's the difference. That's how we've progressed. Now, societies, said Harris, are being organized all over the land to protect and defend American institutions against the aggressions and encroachments of this foreign political power in the Vatican that has gotten a lodgment in this land of liberty. So they had the lodgment. They got it. They got their foot in the door in the beginning with the founding fathers. And as the years went on, they grew and they grew, lying to you about freedom, and they basically wanted freedom of religion. They wanted a free country. If you read Catholic dogma, if you read their history, if you read what they say, their political persuasion of choice is fascism. Not our Constitution. They hate this Constitution. Now, the land of liberty, that is evidently, we had these people. They're lodged into this country back in the 1800s, said Harris, and that is evidently bent on the destructions of our free institutions and substituting for them the papal despotism, a despotism that lords it over in the minds, the consciences, and the actions of its subjects, and thus renders them incapable of loyalty to any other government but to papal power. And that is why your leaders are bowing down to them instead of protecting your country. What does this all mean, said Harris? It is evident that a crisis is even now upon us. He was saying that back in the 1800s. What do you think's going on now? A crisis in which the world-old contest between freedom and despotism is to be definitely and finally settled. This is an old fight. The cause of liberty seemed to have achieved the victory with our forefathers, achieved their independence through a successful revolution, and founded our government on the principles for the first time formally announced in our Declaration of Independence, securing to our people the natural rights of man, freedom of mind and conscience, freedom of worship, and freedom of speech, of action, and protection in the exercise of these rights. Now, let's ponder this a second. That achievement that happened back in 1776 on paper looked good, and most people believed it. However, we didn't understand that the Vatican was behind this, that some of their people were even unknown founding fathers. And what they needed to do was to propose all these things in order to get a foot in the door so they could do this, which is going on today. Destroy the Declaration of Independence, take away the natural rights of man, take away freedom of mind and conscience, take away freedom of worship. We've seen that with the Tony Lamo story, haven't we? How they have ripped apart a Christian ministry who was doing good, that talked the truth about them. One of the last ministries, by the way. And that's why I spend so much time going over what's happened to them. And then they and also their goal was to take away freedom of speech and action when they got power, and protection in the exercise of these rights. They did not want to ever protect these rights. And how they act is when they were weak, back in the 1800s, they act as lambs. But when they gain power and strength clandestinely, they act as lions, which they're doing today. That's why the Pope is here. That's why they can talk like this. Now, back to Harris. He said here, and this is back in the 1800s, he said, here in the wilds of a newly discovered world, he said, and boy, these words sound great. Here in the wilds of a newly discovered world was established a well-considered, well-understood, and truly democratic government. Well, it could be considered that. That's on the face it sounds that way, but is it really that way today? A government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And you know today that is not the truth. That was their goal on paper, to get their power and to take that away from you then. Because he says the tree of liberty was here planted. He's right, in fertile soil, in a congenial climate, and has become a well-rooted, vigorous, fruitful tree of good nature, goodly stature. There are so many people that believe in this. Its branches overshadow the land, and its fruit is pleasant to the taste. The question now, and I think the question now back then and the question today even more importantly, shall it be plucked up by the roots and burned in the fire? I think you're seeing that happen right before your eyes. That's what this whole visit that this man made here is to show you. They're going to pluck up the roots of this democratic government that they're created for a reason, as a front, and they're going to burn it in the fire, and you are unimportant. To this question, this is back now in the 1800s. More than 12 million of American free men for themselves, their wives, and their children, and in behalf of humanity, return in the most emphatic manner to answer, never. Millions back then said never, because they were talking openly about this. And they stood ready, if need be, to seal the answer with their blood. The fruit of the tree of liberty is so sweet to the taste, so refreshing and so invigorating that we are ready to say, give me liberty or give me death. Are people willing to say that now? No. And the reason they're not saying is because you are going to have to stand up against the Vatican. Not only your government, not only despots in your government, and that is what they are protecting. And that is what all this surveillance is about. That is why everything from freedom of religion, the freedom of speech, to Fourth Amendment rights are taken from you. And all you got left is a television set and this hope of freedom. And this lie that they spread all weekend, that the papacy is going to help protect freedom. And back then, Harris said, it is because of that conviction that our government is threatened by a wily and formidable foe. That cause of human liberty is in danger, that we are in the midst of this anti-Catholic agitation. Is this all imaginary? Or is there a real danger hanging over us like a cloud? Is the Roman Catholic Church the friend or the foe of liberty? I say it's the foe, and I think many people understand it but are afraid to talk about it. Is it a branch of the Church of Christ, in common with the various Protestant denominations, laboring in common with them for the establishment of Christ's kingdom on earth? If we answer this question in the light of history, answer that today. Just ask yourself that today. But if we answer this question in the light of history, in the light of present experience, in the light of the monstrous claims of this Pope, the one here that came this weekend, and in the light of the spirit by which it is everywhere and always animated, and in the light of its present efforts in our country and in all lands, we must say that it does not in any degree bear the marks of a Church of Christ. It is, in fact, only a compact, well-organized, and powerful political machine wielded in the interest of the greatest despotism that has ever cursed the earth. That's what should be told today. But what did we hear? Nothing. Nothing of this sort. Millions of people going out and worshiping this is incredibly sad from my perspective. Now, knowing, said Harris, how so few people get a chance to hear this dark side of the story. That was even back then. Can you imagine today? Regarding the duplicity and the evil cunning of the Vatican, as well as their connection with the Lincoln assassination, here are more pertinent passages from the Harris book. Please read every word, since we have no idea how long we have before the Jesuits figure out a way to take these words off the internet. And that is a fact. I wrote about this back in 2006. You think it's gotten any better than that? in the last 9-10 years, it's gotten worse. Now, he says the Jesuit plans with the utmost art and cunning, unhampered by any moral restraints, and are always with the utmost secrecy, and carries out his plans in the dark. We think, however, that this case we have succeeded in tracing him through all the devious wanderings of his dark and slimy path, and in fixing upon him the responsibility for the assassination of President Lincoln. But we are not done yet. In the early part of September 1865, these unholy fathers, these Jesuit unholy fathers, thought it safe to unload their charge onto the brethren in England, and so made arrangements for sending Surratt, Charles, one of the hitmen, across the Atlantic under assumed name and in disguise. One of the Surratt was his last name. He was one of the hitmen that got away, and he was kept in a church hidden in Montreal. From Montreal, he was sent to the Vatican, and they kept him safe. They didn't want... they're basically keeping a perpetrator of the Lincoln assassination away from our authorities. Finally, he was extradited. When the Vatican cut him loose, he was made a Swiss guard for a while, and they caught him in Egypt, brought him back. All right. Categoric evidence, Vatican involvement. Now, they made arrangements for his passage on a British steamer. The Peruvian was the name of the boat, which was to sail from Quebec on September 16, 1865. A physician with whom Boucher was well acquainted, by the name of Macmillan, had just gotten the position of surgeon to this vessel, and they arranged with him to take under his special charge a man by the name of McCarthy, who, for certain reasons, wished to cross the Atlantic under assumed name and in the most secret manner. The day before the Peruvian was to sail from Quebec, these two unholy fathers, Jesuit fathers, conveyed Surratt, John Surratt, in a covered carriage. So they're hiding. You see, that's why we heard this BS story about a lone gunman. We didn't hear the story about the 7 or 8 others involved, or the priests involved, or the notes. Back then they didn't have the internet. But there were priests in Minnesota, Jesuit priests in Minnesota, talking about the assassination, that Lincoln was killed prior to it happening. There was a lot more evidence, too, that we don't. So this idea of a lone gunman, it worked for the masses. That's why they use it today. Worked then, why not use it again? And you can think of a number of lone gunmen, can't you? Lee Harvey Oswald, the Big Patsy. Now, the day before this Peruvian was to sail from Quebec, these two unholy fathers conveyed Surratt in a covered carriage to the steamer that was to carry passengers from the Peruvian from Montreal to Quebec. They had disguised Surratt by coloring his hair, painting his face, and putting spectacles over his eyes. Father Lapierre went also in the disguise of a citizen's dress. Arriving on board the steamer, Surratt was immediately stored away in a stateroom, from which he did not emerge during the voyage. Lapierre remained in his room with him. Reaching Quebec, these two unholy fathers placed their charge in the care of Dr. Macmillan, and then took their final leave of him. They had consigned him to the care of their friends in Liverpool by the hands of Dr. Macmillan, and through whose aid Surratt succeeded in placing himself under the care of the Roman Catholic Church. Now here we have the Vatican taking one of the Lincoln perpetrators and hiding him. Now, don't you think they're involved? Rome, they place him under the care of a Roman church in a foreign land. Rome is everywhere, remember that, and always has been, and always is today, folks. And he can feel safe as long as he's in the custody of this church. And I don't even call it this pagan church. Here he waited for the Peruvian to make another voyage to Quebec and return. He sent by the surgeon to his rebel employers in Canada a request to send him some money, but only to receive the answer they had no money for him. The expense of sending him across the continent to Italy fell upon the Vatican. Yeah, they could afford it. His rebel friends had now forsaken him, but the church, the Vatican, stood by him. He was sent to Italy and was mustered into the army. He was made a Swiss guard. Here he remained safely hidden for more than a year. but was finally discovered by our government, a government detective who had been sent in search of him and who went voluntarily, hoping to get offered a reward. Wouldn't that be something? The bounty hunter back then looking for Surratt, who was involved in the killing of our president, hidden away as a papal guard, and you say the Vatican wasn't involved. Now, why are we... What? Do you think they've changed today? Have they ever admitted this? No. Now, here he remained safely hidden away for a year or more, but was finally discovered, like I said. Now, this detective informed our government of his discovery, and through the agents of our government, the Pope was informed that his soldier, who had enlisted under the name of Watson, did they use Dr. Watson in Sherlock Holmes? Was none other than the notorious John H. Surratt, who was a member of the conspiracy unit that accomplished the assassination of Lincoln. Now, how come we never hear about this? That'll give you an idea that this organization has been plotting. Look at how far they've advanced now with the Pope here just recently. Now, with a shrewd, virtuous innocence, this is typical Vatican, and I only have 5 minutes. The Pope hastened to clear his skirts and those of his underlings by ordering his arrest, claiming they didn't know him. Yeah, right. Nobody gets in the papal guard. Look, if that's to protect, they just let some guy off the street in? I think I'll go there and say, hey, I want to be a Swiss guard. Yeah, they didn't know him. He was allowed to escape, though. That's interesting. So they catch him, they lie to you. He was allowed to escape, and thus given a chance for life and liberty. You see, they gave him a chance. The story was he made his escape by a bold leap over a precipice at the risk of his life. Yeah, they just let him go. Tell this to the Marines. The old sailors will not believe it. He was finally captured in Alexandria, Egypt, brought home in chains, where he was held to answer for the crime. Now, I went over meticulously that trial, and it was nothing. It was another kangaroo court, just like the Tony Alamo trial here. And we won't even get into what happened there. But that's even covered up. Even though they fixed the jury, it was a hung jury, then they protected him the rest of his life. He lived a patsy life, just like probably a lot of these dictators like Hitler never killed in that bunker and lived happily in Argentina with the protection of all these, they got churches all over the place. So the rest of the story goes on to talk about what happened in that trial. And you can go to my article back in 2006. When did I discuss this in depth? September 14th, 2006. Go look for Arctic Beacon articles. And you can get the rest of this. And that trial, when you look at it, they spend a lot of time talking about the particulars about that. So, but let me read you a note, because it sounds... A most noteworthy fact in connection with this trial, bearing upon the subject of our investigation, was the deep interest manifested by the Vatican and Catholic Church priesthood of Washington in the trial, and their sympathy with the accused. There was scarcely a day during the trial, but one or more of them was found in his courtroom coaching him. They also made it manifest that they were there on behalf of the prisoner at bar, and that they were ready to aid in his defense at every... Here we got them aiding the defense of somebody who's prosecuting for the killing of Lincoln. Whenever the prosecution in this case brought a witness to the stand whose testimony was particularly damaging to the accused, a witness was always found to rebut this testimony and was always a member of the Roman Catholic Church. We know how that works. Our court system, folks, is not what it's cracked up to be. John Surratt was a student at St. Mary's College for a year or two at the breaking out of the war. He had commenced a collegiate course, having the priesthood in view. His sympathies were strongly with the South, that he left the college, gave up his priestly aspirations, and engaged actively in the secret service of the Confederate government. As a student, he was popular at the college and seemed to have won the favor of president and faculty. His presence there was no doubt intended to have its effect on the Catholic Church, members of the jury, and we go on. And so read about that. Find some information before they take it off. I keep some of these articles on a flash drive so that in case they wipe everything out. They've wiped a number of my articles out, by the way. A lot of the ones about the Jesuits. It's interesting. It was soon ascertained that Wilkes Booth, who had shot the president, and the detective soon discovered that Surratt was an accomplice of Booth, and that Booth had been a frequent caller of the late at the house of Mrs. Surratt with a number of other people and Jesuit priests. We go on with this trial, which categorically showed that the Vatican was involved with the assassination of Lincoln. However, that was forgotten when Ronald Reagan decided to open up diplomatic relations in the 70s. We're back. We're all out of time. I got a lot more. Maybe I'll come back tomorrow with this. Good night. Have a good evening.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.